Slides are up at salcode.com/WCM. I'm supposed to stand by the mic, aren't I? Salcode.com/WCM, Word Camp Montclair. So if anybody wants to follow along and play the home game, you got it there. Every fall, we take all the patio furniture and make a pile of it, and it is my job to go out and cover it with a tarp to prepare it for winter. Historically, I go out there and I put this tarp over it, and I adjust the edge, and I move along to the next edge and I adjust the edge, and I go around and I do a full loop. Of course, by doing that, I messed up the edges behind me that I had already done, so I do another loop and adjust it. And then I have to go around again, and I find myself in this cycle going around and around again. This year, we tried something different. I got the whole family out there. They didn't touch the tarp. I'm a control freak. However, what they did do is stand around it and gave me a thumbs up when that side looked good. All of a sudden, I could go around and adjust all the edges, and when I got done with just my first loop, I could look around and visually see, oh, hey, I just need to go hit that side. And when I adjusted that side, I could visually see, and I didn't have to go around and do all those little steps. It sounds like a little thing, but it saved me a bunch of time. It reduced my iteration time. And that's exactly what I want to talk about here today, reducing our iteration time with code. What are we going to cover today? We are going to look at an example involving palindromes. I love palindromes. Palindromes are when you have a word or a phrase and you take all the letters and reverse them and they still match. Okay? Palindrome example code, and we're going to look at unit tests with it. We are going to look at the secret to writing easy-to-test code. We're going to look at some other ways we can run unit tests against our code. And finally, we will close with what is my favorite palindrome. So something to keep you engaged and make sure you don't run away halfway. All right. We jump right into some code. Here is a code example we have. We are using a WordPress filter. If you're not familiar with filters, I have a talk up on WordPress TV where I talk all about filters. But the big idea here is this last line, add filter, and then the content. The content is a filter that is part of WordPress core. And then we give it a function that we have defined called palindrome notify. So what the content filter does is when WordPress is going to spit out a blog post and display it on your website, it grabs all the content, the body of your post, and it passes it through on the way to spitting out on the page. And this filter allows us to get in between that. So our function takes in one argument at the top, the content, that's that content from WordPress, the body of our article, and then it returns it. So right now, this filter doesn't do anything. It's just the middleman that's taking the content and passing it right along. But we're going to take this and add our functionality here. But we've now gotten in the place where we want to do things. So now we have added one string before that content. It's a div. It's got some classes on it, so it looks like a nice pretty alert in my theme. And it says the word palindrome. So now the content comes in. We prepend. We add the string at the front and take all of that content and pass it along to WordPress. What does that look like? On my blog, it looks like this. So now we have this nice palindrome alert above our content because we've prepended it there. Great. So now we built this cool functionality. Of course, here it says palindrome, and the title is race car. Classic palindrome, right? We take race car, we take all those letters and flip them around. It still matches. Unfortunately, right now, this is not very good code. Any blog post is going to say palindrome. So we're not really accurately reflecting things here. So to get that functionality, we're going to go back and look at the code. Right now, we're just prepending this announcement. We are going to add an if conditional. So only sometimes do we want to add this palindrome. It was mentioned I used to be a math teacher. And as a math teacher, one of the rules is you always start at your innermost parentheses. So when we look at this if conditional, working our way in those parentheses, we get the title. That's the one on the innermost of the parentheses. Get the title is a built-in WordPress function. It's going to grab from the database whatever the title is that displays on that page and return it to us. So get the title, gets the title of the page. We're feeding that into a function called isPalindrome. That's going to return either a true or a false. I really like naming my functions with is at the beginning when it returns a true or a false, a Boolean variable. I find it really helps me keep track. And I'm like, oh, I know what that function does. So it's going to return a true or a false. And then our if conditional, right? If it's true, we're going to do our return with the prepended alert. If it is false, we'll skip our if conditional, and we return without that prepended announcement. So here we have the is palindrome function. As unfortunately that one's not built in. We need to add that. And so we've written some code here. It takes in a variable. I called it str for string. We're using the built-in PHP function strrev, short for string reverse. Takes the string, flips it around, and we're comparing them. Are they equal? If so, it's true. If they're not, it's false. We go through all of that, and now suddenly we have on the race car blog post, palindrome. On the non-race car blog post, when our title is not a palindrome, we do not get the alert. We did it. Huzzah! Ship it! Is exactly what I used to say before I grew as a developer. Because inevitably, I would write code like that, and I would say, hey, great, this thing works. Ship it out the door, send it. And what would happen?
Things break.
Yeah, bugs, right? Things break. Inevitably. If I was lucky, somebody from quality assurance was the one who said, hey, whoa, Sal, this thing is not working right. If I was unlucky, the end client was the one coming back to me and saying, this doesn't work right. So now, as I've grown older and wiser, I've learned to slow down a little bit and take a look. Okay? Look at this more carefully. We're going to look at this more carefully by using unit tests. Okay. Different function we're defining now. We're using the same add filter the content trick. So we are again going to hop in to the filter as it's coming along, the content as it's coming along from WordPress and spitting out. We added a number 12 in this case. When we add a filter, you can add what's called a priority, which tells us what order this runs in. By default, your priority is 10. So that code we already wrote happening at 10. We're adding this code a little bit later at 12. And what this code is going to do is we take in that content and then we immediately overwrite it. So whatever content's there, we just blew it away and replaced it with ours that says palindrome tests. That's what's going to show up. If we flipped, we can see there it is in our content. All the other content has gone away. This is a great trick if you're working great trick if you're developing locally. This is a bad trick if you are working in production, right? No, they're not happy. They're like, oh, great news, I added some tests. Bad news, Sal, you did this on the live side. That's right, so don't do that. Okay, so right now we hopped in, we hijacked the content. It says palindrome tests. So this is where we're going to put some code so we can get quick feedback on this. Here's some code I'm adding, right? If is palindrome race car is equal to true, then we are going to put a green check mark because that is our expected value. When we have the string race car, we expect is palindrome to be true. If that were not the case, we've got a bug and we're going to give ourselves a red X and display that. So now we've got this. This is what a unit test is. We write some code that says, hey, here's a value we're going to put in. Here's what we expect to get back. Did it work right? And indeed it does. We say, hey, race car, this test passes. Green check, everything's good. Let's add another test. Okay, right, so we've got the first test here. We'll add another one. Really, the important part of this test is this if conditional we added, right? If it matches, green check. If it doesn't match, red X. So we'll add a second one. Sal code. As much as I enjoy my handle, unfortunately, it is not a palindrome. So my expected value here is false. When I put Sal code in, I expect to get back false. So this is the code I'll write. And when it matches what I expect, green check mark. If not, red X. Again, green check mark. Great, I've got 2 unit tests. We have just unit tested some of our code. Now, at this point, you may be looking at this and saying, Sal, you really want me to add 5 lines of code every time I want to add an additional test case? This thing's going to be a massive file. This is going to be a lot to do and prone to error. There's a lot of duplication here. And when you hear that word duplication, if you're a developer, I'm thinking there might be that little bell that goes off in the back of your head. Duplication. Wait a second. Duplication. We could do this more lazily. I'm smarter. more efficiently? Yeah. And indeed we can, right? So here what I've done is I've extracted out a function. Test is palindrome. It takes our string value and our expected value. And then we check and say, hey, when we put this string in, do we get what we expected? If we do, green check mark. If we don't, red X. So now, when I want to add another test case, it's just one additional line that I'm adding to the top of my file here. I'm going to add one line that says, hey, here's another test that we're adding, and here's what I'm expecting. Here's one right now, right? We're going to test Anna, and we expect that to be true. Anna is a palindrome. If I reverse it, it is the same. Great. No, it is not. It failed. But Anna's a palindrome. This should come back true. Oh, I heard it back there. We love it when it's engaged talk, right? I used to be a teacher. When it's engaged talk coming out of the classroom, I'm excited. Usually it's something unrelated, right? So I will take that win. And yes, case sensitivity is our issue here. When that string Anna comes in, we've got a capital A at the front and a lowercase a at the back. So when we reverse it, we have a lowercase a at the front and a capital A at the back. And so when we compare them, it says these do not match. So we've got this bug. So now we know we have a failing test. We go back and we look at is palindrome, and we say, okay, we're going to modify this a little. First, we're going to run string to lower. We're going to convert it to an all lowercase string, and then reverse it, and then our test passes. Anna works. And the great thing is here, we've got the family standing around the patio furniture giving us thumbs up. Race car, Sal code, Anna, they all work. I don't have to go back and check them individually. And this is where the time savings come into play. And also reducing the likelihood that I mess up something from before. I can't count the number of times in my career that I've gone to fix something and cause some other bug. Ugh. If I can prevent that, whew. Okay. Additionally, what we just did is my favorite kind of pull request to review. If I have another developer on the team and they say, oh, Sal, I found a bug. Here, I sent you a thing that fixes it. First, I added a failing test case, and then I updated the code so all the tests pass. Oh my gosh, that is the dream. So, is palindrome is easy to test because it's simple. Right? You're looking and say, okay, that's simple. Clarification point. It is easy to test because it is simple and pure. Pure. We're going to talk about pure functions here. And this is a huge thing that helps when you're writing unit tests. We mentioned I was a math teacher, so changing over to the math teacher hat for a moment. Sit back down. You don't have to leave. It's okay. It's okay. All right? We'll only do math stuff for a minute. In mathematics, when we have a function, the rule is whenever you put in a value, it must always return the same value based on what you put in. It has to be predictable. So whenever here I put in 0 for x, the value I get back, the return value, the f of x, f of 0 in this case, is going to be 3. Because I do 2 times 0, which is 0, plus 3, always going to be. Every time I put in 0, always going to get back 3. Every time I put in 1, I'm going to get back 5. Every time I put in 5, I'm going to get back 13. I can trust this. This is how this works. It is consistent. That is mathematically a function. In computer science, we're a little more loosey-goosey with the word function, right? And it turns out that what mathematicians call a function, we call a pure function. So taking a look at that math function we were just looking at, here's a code version of it. This is a pure function because whenever we put in a value for x, we can be confident of the value we will get back returned to us. It is going to be consistent as it comes through. We can predict that value with certainty. Another pure function, right? This one is going to replace part of our string. If we have the word Gutenberg, it's going to replace it with the block editor because we're not supposed to say Gutenberg, we're supposed to say the block editor because that is the tool rather than the project name, right? So we're going to be good about this, and just in case we missed it, we're going to write code that replaces it. But if I put in whatever string I put in, if it has Gutenberg in it, I can predict with certainty what my return value is going to be. This is a pure function. We know what's coming back. So it's out. Aren't all functions pure, right? I mean, we're always writing stuff. So how about a not pure function? classic not pure function built into PHP, random number generator. You give this rand 0, 10, you might get back a 5. You might get back a 7. You don't know what you're going to get back. This is not predictable. So this is not a pure function. We cannot write a unit test against this. Right? We say, hey, these values go in and something's going to come back. Uh-oh. So we want a unit test that is checking our bounds coming back. There we go. Okay. Check if you've got a number coming back. So one could write a test back in that manner. I would not enjoy writing tests against that. I would like to see it solved in other ways. But that is definitely a path we can go down, and I would love to chat about that more. But it is without a doubt not a pure function, right? Not a pure function, not predictable in what you're going to get returned, not consistent. Another not pure function here, another way. In this case, we are using WordPress's built-in get option. What get option does is it reads from the options stored in the database. So the database is outside of this function, right? A pure function kind of has blinders on. It doesn't care about the world outside of it. It only cares what's going on. A pure function is this member of your team who sits there and doesn't do anything until you hand them something, and then always do exactly the same thing and hand it back. Right? In this case, though, we pull a value from outside, out of our scope, and return it. Not a pure function. Get WP version. In this case, we are grabbing the global WP version variable. Again, outside of our function, looking past those blinders, not a pure function. Going back to where we started, palindrome notify, right? We wrote this code that's going to spit out that alert on our page. We added our filter. It pops it up. This is not a pure function. Why is this not a pure function? Because we are calling get the title. Get the title is grabbing a value from somewhere outside of ourselves. In this case, it's out in the database and pulling it in. So this is not a pure function. Now, not a pure function. There it is. Okay. Now, we did write is palindrome. This is a pure function. This gets the value coming in, the string, and then returns a true or a false. It doesn't care about anything else going on in the world. It doesn't matter what's in the database. It doesn't matter what global variables are set. It's just going to do its thing. Pure function. So, the secret of code that is easy to unit test, you probably know by now, pure functions. Right? When you write pure functions, they are easy to write unit tests against because you can say, I'm putting this in, and I'm expecting this to come out. That's great, Sal, but I need functions that are not pure. I can't just write code like this. I have to get other things. My answer to that is yes, absolutely. And so how does that play out? How does that impact our lives? Well, let's go back to palindrome notify. We said that this is not a pure function. I would not write a unit test against this. What we did do here is we added that function is palindrome, right? We're pulling in, we extracted some of our functionality out into this is palindrome function. We didn't have to do that. We could have put our is palindrome functionality in here where we said, okay, take the string, reverse it, lowercase it first. That code could all be in here. It doesn't need to be a separate function. However, that separate function is pure. So by pulling that out, we can unit test that easily. So extracting functionality into pure functions is a great way to set yourself up to be able to write these unit tests. Right? We've got something that's not pure, whatever's going on. Take a look at it. Oh, this piece here, this logic, this is pure function territory. Pull that out, and we can slap a unit test against it. I got to tell you, writing pure functions has been a game changer for me. Right? Not only is it easier to write unit tests, that's a big advantage there, but my code now is more organized. We were looking at that function, and I said how I could have written it without extracting it out into another function. The fact is, it would have been bigger and messier and less clear what's going on. And I've often struggled with, well, how do I break this apart? How do I make this clear about what's going on? And pure functions are a great indicator, where I say, oh, well, this is pure functionality. Let's pull this out. It also allows me to reuse functions. I can't count the number of times that I've said, ooh, I need something just like that function. Let me use it over here. But this one's just a little bit different. It doesn't do exactly what I want. And when I'm writing pure functions, because they are so specific about what they're doing, I am much more likely to be able to reuse it somewhere else and slot it right in. It helps me catch bugs sooner, right? Certainly writing unit tests helps me catch the bugs, but even just the process of extracting out into the pure functions gives me that extra mental headspace where I'm looking at that a little more deeply, and I find I'm catching bugs even at that point. And finally, refactoring is easier, right? I can make changes, and certainly if I have unit tests, when I change things, I can run those unit tests and confirm it's still behaving in the way I want it. Some other ways to unit test. I will be honest with you, what we've been doing here in hijacking the content as we spit it out, this is not like the standard unit test way that you're going to hear people talk about. It is a great trick to have in your pocket that you can break out and do. I've done this certainly many times, but there are other things you can do. One of the disadvantages of what we've been doing here, though, is because we're hijacking the content, before we ship this code to production, we need to go in and comment out that test code so that we don't have that going up to production. So what would be nice is if we could have our test code and run our tests without having to modify things from what run in production. And so one of the things we can do there is we can do that from the command line. What I'm doing here is I'm adding a separate function called CLI test is palindrome, CLI command line interface. Okay? And then I'm running PHP and feeding it that file. Now, this CLI test is palindrome is not going to run on my website. I'm not including it anywhere. That's not part of that. It only gets run when I specifically run it from here. So now I don't have to make changes to get to run my tests. I can just run this, and that spits out. So what does this look like? All right, this is what my CLI test file looks like. Instead of hopping in and grabbing the content and then prepending things on content and adding stuff as we go along, I'm still using that same test is palindrome idea, that instead of returning a string, it's going to echo out, green check, it's working, red X, it's not. And then I'm running test is palindrome and feeding it again, the string and the expected value. So this gives me all the same benefits of what we saw with the first method, but I can run it from the command line. But it's the command line. Maybe that's not a place you're comfortable yet, but it is a great goal to work towards. So we kind of building up here, right? Jumping in and hijacking the content. That's our base level for adding these. And we said, oh, if we want to do command line, we can do it there. Okay. So command line, we're just looking at that one. Next level is using something like PHP unit. PHP unit really is the PHP standard in code running tests. It's a testing framework for PHP. Oh, hand in the back. Oh. Oh, no problem. I want to make sure. Great. PHP unit testing framework for PHP. And so there are trade-offs here. This is more complex to set up, but more powerful at the end of the day with running your tests. If you're working in a big organization or something like that, it's likely PHP unit's going to be what they have for running tests. PHP unit's also nice in that you don't have to call out individual files. You can configure it so it will run all of your tests. And then you can also tell it sometimes, hey, I only want to run a subset of my tests. So there's a lot of power to PHP unit. And ultimately, it's a great thing to build up to. But it's not necessary for this idea of unit testing. And that's one thing I want to make sure you're coming away with here, is that, you know, unit testing can be this big, scary thing, but it also can be this much smaller thing where we say, hey, it's a function. I'm putting something in. I'm expecting something out. Make sure I'm getting what I expect. So PHP unit, if we rewrite our, get PHP unit, here's what it looks like running from the command line. Now, you have to get PHP unit installed on your machine. Personally, I really like using Composer to install it, which is another level of complexity here, right? So if you're using Composer, then maybe this is a great thing for you. And if you're not yet, it's something you can look to build up to. So here, I'm using Composer install to install PHP unit into my project, and then I run PHP unit. And I just have to run that PHP unit that's in that directory, and then I've got configuration files that tell it these are the things to run. So PHP unit runs 3 tests, 3 assertions. So that's like my 3 green check marks. If it fails, it would tell us that it failed, and it would tell us why it failed, right? Anna, it would say, we expected it to be true, but came back false. Failure. So PHP unit. And PHP unit code looks a little bit like this. It does this cool thing with what it calls data providers. So at the top, we have our testing function. I guess on the other slides, that was at the bottom. That's kind of tricky of me to switch those up. Our testing function at the top that takes in, again, a string and our expected value. And here we use asserts equals. Assert equals, right? Assert equals, make sure these two values are equal. And then we define a data provider at the top. And that data provider passes back all of those values that get fed into it. It's an array of arrays. And each row from the array are the two values that get fed in. So that's the PHP unit version and the way to do it. I do have a GitHub repo that I created with the isPalindrome code, and it has all three of these testing methods in it. So if you want to check out any of them, you can check them out there, and it has the instructions. So if you come away with nothing else from this talk, pure functions, pure functions, pure functions. I hope that is something that comes away with you here. All right. Oh, and we get to the end of my favorite palindrome. So when I was a math teacher, we were discussing palindromes, and I had a student drop this palindrome on me, and I just stood there and stared at him. And I said, really? Finally, I had to write it down and confirm that, indeed, go hang a salami, I'm a lasagna hog, is a palindrome. And to this day, that is my favorite palindrome. In my slides, I do have a list of resources, palindrome, the GitHub repo, the pure functions is a blog post I wrote, and a link out to PHP unit. Thank you very much for your time. My name is Sal Ferrarello. These slides are at salcode.com/WCM for WordCamp Montclair. Thanks, and I'm happy to take questions. Yeah, nice. Cool. Question? Yeah.
Like writing a value to database. Like that's not a pure function, but I mean, how would you typically? You still have to run a unit test. Like if you're anything with WordPress and you're like doing a get option, you still need to like put in a value that you're expecting. And I mean, how would you handle that?
So wait, we're talking about if we're pulling a value out of like get option. So there, I would not write a unit test against that code that's calling get option. Whatever I'm doing with that option, I would extract that out into a pure function and write a test against that. The fact is, get option for pulling something out of a database, I don't think that needs to be tested. I trust WordPress to get me something back there, right? So that I find is where I get the bang for my buck. There are things you can do where you mock functions and have them return to you and everything like this, right? So mocking is a big thing. I do very little mocking. In that I don't feel like that's where I get the bang for my buck. I believe there's stuff you can do there, do unit test and give yourself, but I find that when I have the bugs, it's always in that logic, like is palindrome here or something else where the actual decision making is going on. And so for me, that's where I get it. Now I'm nowhere near 100% code coverage or anything like that when I'm writing unit tests, but I find that I'm getting a lot of value where I'm putting them.
Well, that's when you're working on some of our big media complex, you have to get to 70 or 80% code coverage. So then you do have to mock some of those, like get option, even if you know it works, you still have to mock it so you get that green line, right?
You may have to, yeah, to get that number. I mean, if you're extracting things out into pure functions, that's going to help you get those numbers up, right?
Yeah,
hopefully,
you can't make get option pure.
Right, you can't make get option pure, but hopefully whatever get option's being used in could be short enough, and then the actual stuff that is, where the pure, hopefully you have enough pure functions to get you to your line, is what I'm saying. And if you don't, then absolutely, you're going to have to do some mocking and things like that. Yes. So mocking, for context there, is creating objects sort of artificially and then having them go through and get processed. You create a mock, for example, a mock blog post, right? If you have a post object, you create a mock version of it. That's the idea. Okay. Questions?
What if you're writing a function that references a post variable or a get variable, where you can, for that, you can't really build those into your functions, so would you feel comfortable still writing a unit test for that kind of function?
So the question is, what about a function that's using like a post variable or a get variable, right? Those things are inherently going to be not pure. You can't put that. So again, my goal there, what I would be trying to do is get those values and then feed them off into a pure function. Right, that by extracting that out and putting them in those spots. Now, this doesn't always work out, and WordPress core isn't great about this. I was just looking at the WP add args, I think it's called. There's a function that adds arguments. Essentially, if you have a URL string and you want to add URL parameters at the end, you call this function. If you look at the source code in core, they're using the underscore server there, $_server variable, in such that if you don't pass in a URL, by default, it's going to use whatever URL came into the server. And so that makes that function not pure, right?
Well, you still can't test get because you can't control what people are going to put in the, they can put anything in that URL.
Right. So people could be putting in anything. But
what about end-to-end testing sometimes,
So end-to-end testing is definitely a thing, right? So now today we were talking about unit testing, right? End-to-end testing and integration testing. There are other types of testing you can do that will help you in other areas. Absolutely, right? But in terms of unit testing, that's where, hey, I've got this one thing that does this thing, and I'm going to get these tests and get this working. There's absolutely places for like end-to-end testing and integration testing where you get a system to run itself, essentially. It's as if it were a user using it.
Use JavaScript to insert like something in input field and then a unit test to make sure, then on the search side, you do one thing on the client side, one thing on the search side, so you can test non-pure functions that way.
Sure. Yes. Yeah. So that's definitely a bigger testing scheme going on. Right? So what I'm hoping you come away with today is some of this unit testing, but absolutely, and there's a lot of value in that, right? You can run things like with Cypress or Playwright. You can have it, they're using Playwright on core, right? Yep. So where they say, okay, load a blog post and then put these things in the title and the body and hit publish, right? And confirm that whatever is happening. So that, yes, different level of testing, right? Unit testing is we're looking at this one piece and getting it to work. And that's where the pure functions really pay off. Great questions. Other questions? Oh, one in front here.
So I was kind of interested. So you work for agency, and I'm guessing you have a project like, hey, we need to create a team for a client or whatever, and you have like a month to do it. We work on multiple projects and all that. And a week later, you're asked like, hey, what's the progress? And you're like, I'm kind of too busy doing unit tests. So where's the practical sense of this where you're using this, like, is there like a use case or case study? You can give an example where creating a team for like a client, you use unit tests.
So the question is, where is this balance, to paraphrase, the balance in terms of time, right? How do you sell this off? What if you're a week into the project that you have and they say, how are you doing? You're like, oh, I'm writing all these unit tests. It's great. I'm like, whoa. I need to see some stuff on the screen here, not unit tests. So I find by focusing on pulling things out in pure functions and writing unit tests, particularly once you start using something like PHP unit, there is not a lot of time invested in what we looked at here today in terms of creating those unit tests. So I am not advocating for me, I wouldn't pitch, hey, I need extra time to write unit tests on this. For me, it's when I'm writing this, there are certain things that I can look at this and say, this is a pure function and there's complexity here. Writing unit tests is going to be a win for me overall. This is Palindrome example. On the plugin that I have on the GitHub repo, I have 2 more bugs that I go through and identify by adding unit tests and then updating the code. The amount of time I would have spent if I shipped that and then I got that feedback that came back that said, Sal, we found this edge case that doesn't work. And then I had to go in and fix that edge case. And then I had to ship it out again. And then I had to go through. And I got to make sure I'm not breaking any of the old ones in the process. I am getting things done faster. And I think that unit tests can allow you to get things done faster. And so I wouldn't say sit down and write all your unit tests. I would say as you're going along and you're writing a piece of functionality, keep your eye open for a unit test would benefit for me here. And doing it, this is going to be a gain in time overall.
Right, but it seems like a kind of a personal endeavor where you have a project and you're not expected to be writing unit tests in the work that you're handed over. You're supposed to be doing a theme and getting it to the client with content and all that with the rest of your
Sure.
So it seems like you identify the work and you're like, okay, I need to make these things better. Now there's not enough time at work to do this, so when I go home I'll do this kind of thing. Is that do you find yourself doing that, or
Oh no. So the question was, is this kind of like self-driven? Are you like, oh, I need to improve this. I'm going to do this at home. No, I mean I need enough time to build this feature, and I find that using unit tests in these areas of pure functions for functionality, I can speed myself up overall. I am spending the time that I am working on this right? I am reducing my time on this, not increasing it by using unit tests. And
That's kind of your perception of the situation. I mean, that's the reality as well.
Sure.
But as an agency owner, you're giving a dev like you know.
But as an
So-
agency owner, that's part of the quality, though. Like, right? I mean, part of the quality is making sure it tests out, or it could break things and ultimately cost you time.
I mean, I think there's a balance there, but as an owner, right? So I'm working on a team and I get assigned a task and we come up with an estimate about the size of that task, right? So here's the size of this task. This is what it's going to take to get this task done. And I would argue if you made 2 copies of me and one copy went and did this task without unit tests and the other one did it with unit tests.
No, I get the utility of it. It's just
Okay.
that as an agency, you're supposed to deliver something to a client.
Sure.
You're supposed to get the word, not you, but the one of the agency.
Right.
And all they say is that this needs to get done fast so that we can move to something else. But you're doing something that's not in their kind of best interest in terms of the money spent for the project. And of course, it's going to save you time and it's going to be a higher quality product, but it doesn't make sense to the people running the business.
So I guess, so the question is people coming, running the business say, Sal, you're spending time on this thing. This isn't. And I think that, this talk hopefully is the kind of thing that the conversation I would have and say, listen, I'm delivering things at a strong velocity, right? If I was the slowest member of the team, then I think that's they can ask that question. And I think that you can get caught up over unit testing or trying to cram them into places.
Right. So the other question is, sorry, I'm asking another one, but are you actively doing this, and how do you get others on the team to kind of, you're writing unit tests, the other devs might not be into it. How do you deal with that, and are you running into that problem as well?
So you get that sometimes. I think you're always going to have a variability to how into unit tests people are. I think one of the things you do is with PR reviews, when you hand a PR review off to someone and you say, as part of the testing steps, here's the PHP unit command that you run to run just this set of tests and see they pass. There's some excitement there that goes with that, right? There's this feeling of, hey, this has some value. It's not always an easy sell, right? Sometimes you're going to be in a refinement meeting and you're going to call out and say, ooh, this would be something that would be really good to unit test. And depending on what the team looks like and where you are, maybe you have the power to push that, and maybe you get that task and you get to implement them, and maybe it just doesn't happen, right? So this, to me, unit tests isn't, in my mind, so much about clubbing other developers over the head and making them write unit tests. It's about showing them this is a win. Like in the same way that maybe you used to use while loops all the time, and then you learned that for loops could be beneficial in some statements instead of while loops all the time. To me, this is the same kind of idea that I think it's a win that you pick up this trick and gain it. Yeah. Good questions.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. You could tie this into GitHub and kind of automate the process. So if someone else on the team pushes up code or creates a pull request, it runs these tests automated.
Oh, that's true. So the question was, can you tie this into something like GitHub and have them run the tests automated? Absolutely. You could have it set up so that if somebody pushes a pull request, right, when that comes up, it runs these tests. And if the tests don't pass, they get a notification, and you don't even have to go review it then until they get their tests passing again, right? So, right. But you got to have tests in the first place. But that kind of tying in works particularly well with something with like PHP unit, where it has a framework built around it, where it's running those tests. So, I mean, sky's the limit. Yeah.
Hey, Sal, tying in the last talk, do you have any, do you think there's any value in using like Copilot or AI to help write your unit tests?
Oh, great question. The question is, what do you think about using Copilot or AI? Copilot is GitHub's AI specifically, or AI in general for writing unit tests. I'm wary of it. So the question is, have I used it? I find that I really like Copilot in terms of writing doc blocks and things like that. Personally, for me, I have not found a lot of cases where I'm going to it for writing code. I've heard there's value, particularly when dealing with languages that you're not familiar with, that it's good to help you learn that kind of thing. And I think I can see it in sort of that exploratory form. But this idea of like looking at the code and identifying could be pulled out into a pure function and then writing tests against it, I could actually imagine I guess I haven't used it, but I can imagine some of the boilerplate. When we looked at the PHP unit code, there's some boilerplate there with creating a data provider and things like that. Helping to create that boilerplate, I'm on board with AI for something like that. I think the idea that you just say like, hey, here's some code, go write unit tests against it, I'm not sold on that yet, but I'm willing to check it out.
I just thought it could be an option, you know, for people who think, hey, this is taking me more time. It could speed it up a little bit.
That's true, right? And maybe if you had already defined a pure function, right, and you have type hints in there that indicate these are the things going in, and this is the return value coming back, and then have it test. That seems reasonable. Is that my time?
No, but I was, got 4 minutes, but I was gonna ask you, somebody probably asked this already.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on test-driven development?
So late to class here. Somebody else probably on. All right. All right. No. Great question. What are my thoughts about test-driven development? And so I haven't used this term at all in this talk, but test-driven development is this idea that maybe you write the tests before you actually write your code. So is palindrome, I know I'm going to write a function called is palindrome, and it's going to take a string, and I can expect a certain value. So I could write out all those tests and then go write is palindrome. I think it's a lovely idea. I find that my brain doesn't quite work that way. However, so the idea of doing the test first, I can't get there. My brain doesn't quite get that way. But doing the test as I go along, very much what I ended up doing here, where I took a first pass at is palindrome, and I say, oh, hey, it works. And then I started adding some tests, and that allowed me to identify my edge cases, and then I updated it, and it allowed me to verify and get all those thumbs up from the family standing around the pile of patio furniture. That I find to be very useful. So I think that kind of test-driven development, yeah, it is helping me writing those tests when I'm writing that function and getting that feedback and squashing bugs. But the idea that I would sit down and just like, well, I know I'm going to write this thing, so let me write these tests here about what it's going to do, and then I'm going to go do this. I can't see that far ahead. Maybe others can, but not for me.
Can I add to that?
Sure.
I would just say, like, when you're developing, there's a balance there, right? Like I said before, like, I think it's important while you're writing your functionality, while you're writing your code, it's important to be like, how am I going to test this? And it's something that me and my coworkers talk about a lot. And if we say if it's going to be hard to test, before you even get to writing unit tests, you try to do it like in a different, more pure way, like you would say.
There we go. So yeah, looking at that code ahead of time and sort of planning out.
And
right?
you're not writing the tests as you're going along, but you are at least kind of thinking about it and like mapping it out and stuff.
Right, and that goes back to this idea that writing pure functions has helped me as a developer, right? It's sort of that planning out kind of idea. You're like, oh, when I'm planning this out, look for when can I hit these pure functions here? Yeah, great stuff.
One thing, sorry.
I think you're good.
One thing I was curious about looking at your code though is that from the way you're running it, it seemed like you're using PHP and also PHP unit. Because you're using pure functions, the example is to compare a string basically. You seem like, it seemed like you were, there was a bigger kind of code there which wasn't on here, but it seemed like you were out of the scope of WordPress because you weren't using WP load or WP CLI eval, file or eval or whatever. So are you just running on simple functions when you say pure functions, or because like you discussed, you're not able to evaluate, get post or whatever, get title because they are mutating. So is that what you were talking about?
So the question is, when we were looking at running PHP unit or just PHP, when I ran those command line tests, we're running outside of the scope of WordPress, right? So we don't have WordPress there. So for example, WordPress has lots of built-in functions, and we don't have any of those accessible to us there. So a couple of things come out of that, right? Certainly, maybe you're writing strictly PHP code. Overall, I'd say that's my goal, is to write strictly PHP code. You can also load some of that WordPress code in there. I've also done things in the past, very much like my first example when I added to the web page, where essentially I'm running them from WP CLI as like a medium hack kind of thing, where I'm like, hey, I want to have these WordPress functions available to me, but I want to be able to write this test that runs against this pure code, but maybe inside that code, I'm calling some WordPress function. But overall, I would say I am trying to write pure functions that don't use WordPress functionality, and that way it just runs against that. So that's my take. But I think other people can handle it different ways. Cool. Oh, actually, hang on, I got one in the back. But
A kind of similar one to a separate test suite that, you know, installs WordPress, sets up the database, tests everything like all together, like your end to end, and kind of run them separately, or do you not bother? You know, like in your real world scenario, like kind of how do you structure it?
So the question was, if we've got these PHP unit tests against the pure functions that we're writing, and we've got end-to-end testing, right, that's going against WordPress and everything like that, how does that look? And the answer is are they separate? Or the question is, are they separate? And essentially, yes, right? You've got your unit tests, and then you've got your integration tests, or your end-to-end tests. And those are really two kind of separate things in the code bases I've worked on, right? That's, you're either running one or the other. And in many cases, you end up running both, of course, before you end up shipping anything. But when I'm developing, often I'm just zipping through those unit tests quickly. I want very fast iteration times on my unit tests, while integration tests, sometimes those are a little bigger with things going on.
In a big organization, they'll typically be different teams that do that.
Oh. All right, I think we are out of time. Thank you very much. I will be out in the hall, though, because I would love to continue the conversation when everybody wants to talk about it. Thank you, thank you, thank you.